Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LaBelle. Conservative media tell us the political left in the United States has become radicalized. Electing Joe Biden would usher in an era of socialism, profoundly changing the country. On the other hand, Biden and many in his orbit claim nothing would fundamentally change. So which is it? Or is it, as always, just about power? To discuss this and more, I'm joined by my guest, Laura Fink in San Diego. She is the founder and CEO of Rebel Communications, as well as a Democratic strategist. And in Ellicott City, we cross to Jason Nichols. He is a political analyst, as well as a senior lecturer in the African American Studies Department at the University of Maryland. All right, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Okay, let's go to San Diego. Laura, I always go to the person that gets up earliest for the program, so I'm glad it's you. I'm a political junkie like the both of you. I watch a lot of different things, disagree with most of it, agree with a tiny bit of it. But if as we're in this election cycle, let's take, for example, Fox, okay? The impending dystopia if Joe Biden is going to be elected. Now, I think that things could change when you look at the people around him, but you have two very starkly different interpretations of fundamental change of changing the country and to nothing will fundamentally change. How do you see things playing out? Go ahead.
Well, I do go on Fox News occasionally. I understand the culture there, but the Fox News is about asserting a narrative as well as reporting a narrative, and so it's part of their culture to say to stir up discomfort in the right and make them feel like they're under threat. And so I can understand with the rise of the progressive left and some of the ideals of the progressive left, whether you're talking about Medicare for all or you're talking about the Green New Deal, that they want to, because they disagree with those policies, they want to demonize that and talk about it as if it's extreme. Also, we are in an election year, and so talk of socialism will rise. And so to them, on these right-wing channels, the goal really is to stir up the base and to instill a fear of the rising left. Now, that said, absolutely, with the left is on the rise, and the political left has been galvanized like never before in the age of Donald Trump. So we see not just ideals move forward and the public conversation and opinion moving to the left, but we also see firebrand leaders like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and even like Bernie Sanders that are able to carry that with a new generation of voters.
Jason, same question to you. That was an excellent answer from Laura. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, well, as far as dystopian outcomes from leadership, I don't think we can get any more dystopian than we are right now. I think we're in a very precarious situation as a nation, and I think a lot of it—
Is that Donald Trump's fault?
I think a lot of it is. I think you always should point to the top and look at leadership. When your leadership fails, then the country fails, and then the country gets torn apart, and we're divided. We're not the United States of America. And that ultimately falls in the lap of the leader. And our leader right now is Donald Trump, and he has not done what we look for in leadership. He has not accomplished what most leaders want to do, which is to actually unite the people behind a common cause, not unite half of the country behind one person. I think that when we look at some of the narratives that we've seen in media, I think Laura had it correct that there is an objective for one side or the other, whether it's Fox or MSNBC or some of the smaller networks. They all have a narrative that they want to tell and that they want to show. And we can talk about the political left, but I think it's a very big tent where you've got someone like Joe Biden who has been moderate.
Yeah, but I'm glad you brought that up because, Laura, I mean, it's a big tent right now. And I mean, the thing as I look at it is that it really has very little— we're going to talk about policy still, but it has very little to do with policy. It has everything to do with Donald Trump. This is a referendum on his presidency. It's not really on the policy. Though if Joe Biden comes in, it's not going to be easy street for the Democratic Party and its rough relationship with its progressive members right here. So it's a united tent now because of Donald Trump. Your reaction?
Well, we've had Donald Trump for a long time and we haven't had a united tent. I mean, we go all the way back to 2016. So it's not, I would say that certainly Donald Trump is a galvanizing force, but it also is, it is not only the institutional leaders like Joe Biden that have a long history and record of experience in the Democratic Party, but it's also the willingness of the political left to play ball. And we see that again with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez voting for Pelosi as speaker, coming in, working within the system. And I think that that's about understanding power. To your earlier point, Peter, she understands power fundamentally at, what is she, 29 years old, and has learned that she can galvanize her community outside of the halls of Congress and then use the power, their power, to bring it to the halls of Congress and the halls of power in a different way than maybe activists might expect. The power of the political left is on the rise, but let's not forget, I mean, in 2018, we won with moderates. So the Democrats marched and took over the Congress with moderates, and mostly moderate women. So that I do believe that fundamentally there's some political gravity in Congress that won't change. However, the needle is moving. You know, when Joe Biden is having weekly conversations with Elizabeth Warren about how to execute policy, then that is a sea change from, you know, his days with the neoconservatives on his sort of intellectual squad. So fundamentally, the American people have moved and the politicians have moved with them, new and old.
You think they're really conversations? I've seen some of them, they're not really conversations, but anyway, that's a subject for another program. Jason, I know that because you're a frequent guest on this program, we're very grateful, but you were a Bernie Sanders supporter. Do you have, is there a burning feeling in your stomach you must vote for Joe because of Donald Trump, not because you love Joe?
Well, I think that's how politics work. I think we, you know, we take the options that we have and we vote for the person that we think will do the job better. In this case, it is Joe Biden. When I look at him and Donald Trump, of the, you know, the politicians or the candidates that we have available, which one is, I think, the stronger leader, which one is better versed in foreign policy, which one will do better with domestic policy, and which one is interested in or more interested in the issues that I think are important for the American people. And right now, I think that's Joe Biden. Now, if Joe Biden were running against someone else, I think it would be different. And I want to be clear, when I said big tent, I didn't say united tent. We're not always united. And I think one of the things that is, and I think that's actually a good thing. I think one of the things that Laura pointed out is the fact that there are conversations. And I think what Joe Biden is doing correctly right now is that he is making it clear that the progressive left will at least be listened to, and that they'll be part of the conversation, and that they'll be part at the table. Not necessarily that he's going to agree with them all the time.
Is that enough for you, to be listened to? I mean, after 2016, you're still willing to just be, you know, you'll accept being listened to.
Well, no, I'm not trying to be, you know, a dictator of the party or of the United States. I want to be part of the conversation. I want to be heard. And, you know, I want to be someone who affects change. I can't go along and say that everything I want should happen right now. I think that you try to push for those things, but you also have to work within the structures that exist. And I think that's what it's about. For a long time, people like Joe Biden actually have ignored young voters. They've ignored the progressive left, and they've even made fun of them at times. And now they realize that this is a political force that is growing, and they cannot beat Donald Trump or anyone else without having them at the table. And so now he's willing to talk, he's willing to make concessions, which is the right thing to do. I think that the right does the same thing. They're a slightly smaller tent, but you have some people who are closer to the center, and then you have some people who are really far away, and they have conversations.
The Tea Party caucus did quite well, okay, to transform the GOP, not necessarily in a good way. I am not a Republican. I'm a conservative. I don't really have anything to do with the Republicans.
I'm glad you make that distinction.
Yeah, well, yeah, but, you know, I kind of think that the progressives have been less effective in the Democratic Party. Laura, let me go to you. One of the things I find very, very curious is that particularly on Fox, and then we hear from the president himself, they like to invoke the word socialism as to scare people. But I think if you look at public opinion polls, a lot of younger people find that to be a very positive term. I sometimes find these GOP people to be so tone deaf to what's actually people are thinking about and talking about. I'm a former academic, and in the early 1990s, socialism was very popular at the University of California. It just seeped into the culture. Your reaction?
I think the debate about socialism is kind of a silly one, with all due respect to the term and to the right-wing media, because it really is about policies. I mean, whether you attach yourself to a particular philosophical label, ultimately this is kitchen table politics. Do you have health care, and how do you get it? Do you have a job, and how do you get it? What happens when you lose your job? Is a job, or is it just, are we all just our own independent contractors, you know, getting with our apps being hired with no safety net? And so
that's bipartisan. You can't pin that on one party. That's for sure. Keep going.
We're fighting that battle here in California, and I think it's an important one to talk about, because people aren't thinking about, am I a socialist or not, most of the time. They're thinking about, can I buy a house? Am I going to be able to feed my family? Are my rights going to be protected in the workplace? Am I going to carry the burden of the nation's of the costs of the nation, or are wealthy people going to pay their fair share? You know, if I'm a woman or if I'm a person of color, am I going to be respected and afforded the same rights in the Constitution as everybody else, or is the power dynamic different? Those are the things that people think about and care about deeply. And so I think the debate about socialism is an invention to try to polarize people rather than talk about the ideas they may agree on.
I absolutely agree, because I lived in communist Eastern Europe in the 1980s. I know what socialism is, okay? I always find, I take a kind of a irreverent chuckle when people start talking about it, and I think most Americans couldn't find Venezuela on the map if their life depended on it. Same point to you, Jason.
Oh, Peter.
Yeah, I would agree. I think more this is about policy. So I would agree with Laura. I think also, as you stated, that young people are not afraid of the term because they know what socialism is.
They know what it is, okay? But anyway, keep going.
From a philosophical standpoint and from a theoretical standpoint, they understand that we have socialism all around us. We have socialism here in the United States of
America. Rich people certainly have socialism.
Absolutely. There's, I think it was Dr. King who said, we have rugged individualism for the poor and socialism for the rich. And they call, for the poor, they call it welfare, they call it handouts, they call it socialism, but, for the wealthy, they call it subsidies, or for people of certain races, it's a subsidy, others, it's welfare. So again, I think that we absolutely have socialism in this country, and it functions in some cases for the public good. We can talk about Social Security. We can talk about Medicare. We can
talk about a lot of different policies. After our break here, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after our short break, we'll continue our discussion on, is the left too radical in America? Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LaBelle. To remind you, we're talking about whether the Democratic Party has been radicalized. Okay, let's go back to San Diego. Laura, let's talk about a lot of issues here. In looking at some of the characterizations of the political left in the United States right now, there are these issues, the packing the court, the Electoral College, getting rid of it, amnesty up to 20, 30 million people, Green New Deal, whatever that really means, open borders, defunding the police, the filibuster. These are all related to the left. And react to at least one of them. Okay, go ahead.
Well, you've taken the most conservative labeling and framing of all of those issues.
I think all the labels are fair. I think pretty much fair.
Well, not unfair, but we don't call it amnesty. You know what we call it? Immigration reform. You know, so let's talk about let's talk about all of those issues. The political left is on the rise, and they certainly have an agenda. That said, you know, ultimately people want action. All of the things that you're talking about, whether it's policy on the environment, policy on immigration, policy on criminal justice reform and police reform, the broad swaths of the American people. You didn't mention you didn't mention gun safety. All of these issues are top issues for Americans in the pandemic and out of the pandemic. And we've seen gridlock in Congress, you know, masterfully executed by Mitch McConnell now for many, many years. And when broad swaths of the American people want to see, and I say this, independents included in that, moderate Democrats included in that, and even slices of Republicans included in that. So the political left is carrying water on issues that Americans care deeply about. So do I think you're going to see action on those issues when we come back to Congress, especially if Democrats take back the Senate? Absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, the things that I mentioned are institutional changes. Jason, getting rid of the Electoral College, okay, packing the court, okay. I mean, this is trying to create a political monopoly. Adding the District of Columbia as a state, 2 more senators, which would be 99% sure Democrat. I mean, I've talked to many liberals about this, and they say, you know, we have an imperfect democracy. Maybe, but at the same time, you know, these are creating institutional changes in which they would create a monopoly forever, where the left would be in control, and getting rid of the filibuster as well. Go ahead, your reaction, Jason.
So number one, when it comes to Washington, D.C., do you believe in taxation without representation?
I believe
like, that's not very democratic. That's not what our founding fathers actually wanted.
Carved out with eyes wide open, and it is even in the Constitution as well.
Let me just say, taxation without representation in many ways is tyranny, and I actually think, you know, it's not
for democratic reasons, not for power reasons, right? Be honest.
Hold on. And we know that Washington, D.C., one of the reasons Ted Kennedy actually said it out plainly is because it's too black and too democratic. And that's not why you take someone's vote away. At least it shouldn't be in 2020. So again, we need to address these things. And when we talk about the will of the people, we have to understand that the Electoral College, if you understand its foundation, goes back to the 3/5 compromise. It may be dated right now. And, you know, you shouldn't have a situation where someone loses by 3 million votes, 3 million Americans believe that the other person should have won the election, and then they come out, they emerge the winner. So to me, it sounds to me like we need to address these things, at least start to have a conversation about how to fix them, how to make it more democratic, how to make it so that the will of the people is actually executed. And again, I would add, you know, if you want to talk about taxation without representation, we can also throw Puerto Rico in there. The fact that they pay federal taxes and still don't get representation in Congress. They get somebody who gets to speak a couple of words. And I think that that is fundamentally unfair for American citizens. If you're an American citizen, you should have all the same rights as the next American citizen. And right now we're talking about John Lewis, and that's exactly what he stood for. You know, with John Lewis having just passed away, was fighting for the fact that every American should have the same rights, particularly when it comes to voting, as every other American.
Okay, but Laura, if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, I don't think we would be having this conversation about the Electoral College, would we?
I fundamentally disagree. I think that that Jason really hit it on the head when he said that this is really about voting rights, and voting rights are fundamental. We have people marching in the street, and not just black people, white people marching from the suburbs with their strollers, saying the time is now. We see the connection between police violence and voter disenfranchisement. We see the connection between the gutting of the Voting Rights Act and people's inability to hold people in public office accountable. So I fundamentally disagree. I think that there are movements in this nation that would have happened whether you have a Hillary in the White House or a Donald Trump, because these issues transcend party and are the cornerstones of our democracy. Not everything's a political power play. but things maybe have been jerry-rigged for some time in favor of certain constituencies.
I think it's always about power, always. I don't think I don't think people in politics are virtuous at all, okay? I think that it's about...
John? Not our good John Lewis, he wasn't virtuous?
Maintaining their power, and that's why these issues are being discussed, because it will enhance power and it will fundamentally change the institution. We'll be able to hold on to it probably forever, okay? So you're talking about disenfranchising half the country because you're thinking about enfranchising others, okay? I think it has to be a much more balance right there.
But it's not a zero-sum game. Allowing people to vote, it doesn't take your vote away or any conservative's vote away. It just brings their vote to the table.
And then at the expense of other people, why will anyone go campaign in Iowa?
That math don't add up. Like, it just doesn't. Like, I don't take your vote away by giving a vote to someone else. It's not a piece of pie.
Other votes are more important than the other, and that is the whole reason why we had the Electoral College in the first place, to make sure that New York and Virginia didn't dominate national politics forever. That's why
That's exactly what happened. Are you kidding?
Jump in. Go ahead.
Hold on. But first of all, because of the Electoral College, Virginia dominated the White House for the first part of the first 11 presidents. 7 of them were from Virginia, because they counted their enslaved Africans as 3/5 of a person. And they didn't have as big a population as they had in the North, but they started counting people who didn't have the right to vote. So again, I think your history is a little mixed up here. And I would also say that, as Laura stated, what we need is one person, one vote. That's the way a democracy works. So no one's going to go to Oklahoma and say, we're going to take away your vote.
We're a constitutional republic. Remember that.
By the way, we had 2 presidential candidates in 2016, and both of them were from New York. So I don't understand how this is taking anything away.
It's perfectly clear. How do you win the presidency? You need 270 electoral votes. That you can talk about the
majority of Americans
you want, but when you run for president, you know that you need 270. You don't need X number of millions of votes. You need 270 electoral votes. You know that going into the game. And if you don't like the outcome, and I can understand George W. Bush, Gore got more than George W. Bush, but the goal is to win 270. And until we change it, and if you want to have a debate about it,
I think the argument that we're both making is that not that we don't like the outcome, it's that we don't like the process. And I'll hand it to Jason, because I know he's been trying to get in here.
No, I agree. And, Peter, I think the primary thing, and I think I may have kind of lost my thought here, but the primary thing is that we would not be having this conversation if Hillary Clinton had won, because the majority of Americans voted for Hillary Clinton. So I agree the discussion about the process probably would have been delayed, because the outcome was what, the 66 million Americans wanted. And that makes sense that we wouldn't have a conversation, because it would be functioning, the way it should. But when you have a situation where there's a 3 million vote deficit for the winner, then it doesn't make sense. It's like if you play a basketball game and I have 100 points and you have 97, but you win? That doesn't make sense. So again,
true. This is the analogy is a basketball game. Who gets the most points wins. In a presidential election in the United States, who gets 270 electoral votes? That's
right. That happens by fuzzy math.
Let me just jump in here. Let me jump in here, because Peter, you keep telling us how the system works, as opposed to arguing in favor of how you're saying the system works this way, therefore the system should work this way. And fundamentally, that's not an argument in favor of it. It's simply a statement of fact.
We can't change the rules in the middle of the game.
So there's no change of rules as long as we have our democracy? Like in the 200 years, we haven't seen changes to the way that our rules are structured? I mean, it's all about changing the rules right now.
If you win the House of Representatives, you win the Senate, and you win the White House, you're going to you'll have the possibility to make massive changes that will not be elected, will not be agreed to by a strong majority. So what is the majority thinking on the Electoral College? What is the majority thinking on immigration? What is what I worry about is if the left takes control of the three branches of government, they won't care about what the majority position is on a lot of these, because you'll have the power, and that is the whole purpose of
get the power.
Go ahead, Jason.
Not the power because the majority voted for you. Like, that's how you get the power, you know, except for the presidency. That's the one area where the majority cannot vote for you. You can actually lose the majority and win the majority. And that's the exact point that we're making about someone like Donald Trump and George W. Bush. The majority did not vote for them and they still won.
What about the filibuster rule? Again, making it easier, okay, for the majority power to maintain power. Go ahead, Jason.
You know, I guess I wasn't here when Merrick Garland was essentially not allowed a hearing. I wasn't here when Mitch McConnell and the Republicans fundamentally changed the norms of how Congress works. I can think back to Newt Gingrich when he started doing it. Ultimately, it frustrates me to hear that the constitutional democracy has been unwound for some time by the right. So when we're talking about reforms, neutral reforms by the left, that we keep forgetting our history and how we got here. Because there's no rule that says you can't appoint a Supreme Court justice in an election year. So when you abuse the filibuster, which is a gentleman's and women's agreement from times past, we have to fundamentally look at that filibuster and say, is this working in the context of some of the deep problems of our democracy? Now, I'll say that it's none of it's ideal.
We've run out of time. Very spirited. I wanted two left-wing people to come on and debate, and it was a really good debate, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope our viewers did too. I want to thank my guests, Laura and Jason. I want to thank our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. Remember, CrossTalk rules.